You're standing in the scorching heat of a Theban palace courtyard in 1323 BC, watching as servants carry steaming copper bowls filled with what looks like liquid gold mixed with something far more disturbing. The air shimmers with incense, and another smell, something metallic and organic that makes your throat tighten. Through the limestone corridors, you hear the soft chanting of priests and the gentle splash of water against stone. But as you draw closer to the royal bathing chambers, you realize that what you're witnessing isn't the luxurious beauty ritual you might expect from the most powerful women in the ancient world. Instead, you're about to discover hygiene practices so extreme, so revolting, and so deeply rooted in religious terror that they would make even the strongest stomach turn. This is the hidden world of Egyptian royal beauty, where the line between purification and horror was razor thin, and where queens literally bathed in substances that would be considered toxic waste today. Before diving into these forgotten stories of ancient suffering and devotion, if you enjoy learning about the darkest truths hidden in history's shadows, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these disturbing ancient practices together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with the macabre realities of the past. The truth about Egyptian royal hygiene reads like a catalogue of medieval nightmares, each practice more disturbing than the last. Yet to understand why the most powerful women in the ancient world subjected themselves to these horrors, we must first understand the world they inhabited. A world where cleanliness wasn't just about comfort, but about cosmic survival, where a single ritual mistake could doom not just the queen, but the entire kingdom to eternal chaos. The bloodbath ritual of divine purification. What if I told you that Egyptian queens regularly bathed in fresh animal blood, believing it would grant them the life force of the gods themselves? This wasn't some occasional ceremony. This was a monthly ritual that required the systematic slaughter of dozens of sacred animals, their warm blood collected in golden vessels and mixed with oils and herbs to create what priests called the elixir of divine life. Picture Queen Nefertiti, the woman whose beauty has captivated the world for over 3 millennia, lowering herself into a bath filled with the steaming blood of freshly killed bulls. The liquid would be thick and warm, with a consistency like syrup, coating her skin in a crimson layer that took hours to properly absorb. The smell would be overwhelming, metallic and rich, filling the bathing chamber with an odor that lingered for days. But this wasn't just about the blood itself. The ritual required that the animals be killed in a specific way, their throats cut with ceremonial knives while priests chanted prayers to ensure their life force would transfer to the queen. The temperature had to be perfect, too hot, and the blood would coagulate into clumps that stuck to the skin like chunks of liver. Too cold, and the supposed magical properties would be lost. Servants would test the temperature with their bare hands, often burning themselves on blood that was still steaming from freshly killed animals. The queen would remain in this bath for exactly 47 minutes, the time it took for the constellation of Orion to move 1 degree across the night sky. During this time, she couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't even blink excessively, as any disturbance might break the spiritual connection between her mortal flesh and the divine essence flowing through the blood. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. The blood wasn't just from any animals. It had to come from creatures that had been raised in complete darkness, fed only on sacred grains, and never allowed to see sunlight until the moment of their death. These animals were kept in underground chambers beneath the temples, living their entire lives in pitch blackness so their blood would be pure and untainted by the corruption of the everyday world. The psychological torture these creatures endured was considered essential to the ritual's power. After the bloodbath, the queen couldn't off. The blood simply rind had to be scraped from her skin, using specially crafted bronze tools. Each scraping motion performed in a precise pattern, that traced the outline of hieroglyphic symbols across her body. The scraped blood wasn't discarded. Instead, it was collected and burned in sacred fires, the smoke believed to carry the Queen's prayers directly to the gods. The entire process took nearly 6 hours, during which the Queen had to remain completely still while servants worked around her body with their scraping tools. The crocodile grease hair treatment that poisoned minds and bodies. If the bloodbaths sound horrific, wait until you hear about what Egyptian queens did to their hair. They believed that crocodile fat, when properly prepared and aged, contained the power to grant eternal youth and divine wisdom. But the process of preparing this fat was a nightmare that would make modern chemists recoil in horror. Fresh crocodiles were captured from the Nile and kept alive in temple pools for months, fed a special diet designed to make their fat as potent as possible. When the time came for harvest, the crocodiles were killed in elaborate ceremonies, their bodies carefully dissected to remove every trace of fat from around their organs and under their skin. This fat was then mixed with mercury, lead, and various plant extracts that were themselves highly toxic, creating a paste that looked like melted gold but contained enough poison to kill a dozen people. Queen Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was said to have used this mixture daily, rubbing it into her scalp and through the length of her hair. The immediate effects were dramatic. Her hair would become incredibly shiny and appeared to glow with an otherworldly light. But the long-term consequences were devastating. The mercury and lead slowly poisoned her nervous system, causing mood swings, memory loss, and eventually contributing to the erratic behavior that marked her final years. The application process was as disturbing as the ingredients. The Queen's head would be shaved completely bald every few weeks, exposing the raw scalp to the toxic mixture. Servants would massage the crocodile grease paste into her scalp using their bare hands, often developing severe skin reactions and neurological symptoms themselves. The paste would be left on for hours, during which time the Queen experienced intense burning sensations as the chemicals ate away at her skin and penetrated into her bloodstream. But the Queens believed this suffering was necessary. They thought the crocodile's predatory nature would transfer to them, making them more ruthless and effective rulers. The mercury was supposed to grant them the liquid wisdom of the gods, while the lead would make their thoughts as permanent and unchanging as stone monuments. In reality, these substances were slowly destroying their brains, causing the kind of erratic and paranoid behavior that historians have long attributed to the stress of royal life. The ritual mummification of living flesh to prevent aging. Perhaps the most disturbing practice involved what Egyptian queens called the ritual of eternal preservation. Believing that the mummification process could be applied to living tissue to prevent aging, queens would have portions of their bodies wrapped in the same materials and chemicals used to preserve the dead. This wasn't a one-time procedure, but an ongoing process that consumed years of their lives. Starting with their hands and feet, queens would have their skin treated with natron salt, the same substance used to dry out corpses. The salt would burn and crack their skin, creating wounds that took weeks to heal, but they believed this process would prevent their flesh from aging normally. The process began with the Queen lying motionless on a stone table, while priests painted her limbs with a mixture of tree resin, beeswax, and ground beetles. The beetles weren't just any insects. They were scarabs that had been fed exclusively on human waste for months, their bodies swollen with toxins that the Egyptians believed would transfer the power of decomposition and rebirth to living flesh. As the mixture dried, it would contract and tighten around the Queen's skin like a second layer of flesh, cutting off circulation and causing excruciating pain that lasted for days. But the real horror came when the wrappings were applied. Using linen strips soaked in a solution of tree sap, animal fat, and crushed minerals, servants would bind the Queen's arms and legs so tightly that her skin would turn purple from lack of blood flow. These wrappings had to remain in place for exactly 40 days, the same period used for mummifying the dead. During this time, the queen couldn't use her wrapped limbs normally, requiring servants to carry her everywhere and feed her like an infant. The psychological effects were as devastating as the physical ones. Queens reported vivid hallucinations during the wrapping period, claiming they could see and speak with the spirits of dead pharaohs. Modern analysis suggests these visions were likely caused by oxygen deprivation to the brain, as the tight wrappings restricted blood flow throughout their bodies. Some queens became so addicted to these hallucinatory experiences that they would extend the wrapping periods far beyond the prescribed 40 days, causing permanent nerve damage and muscle atrophy. When the wrappings were finally removed, the queen's skin underneath would be pale white and soft like a newborn's, but also scarred and pitted where the chemicals had eaten away at the tissue. The priests proclaimed this as evidence that the ritual was working, that the queen's flesh was being reborn in a state of eternal youth. In reality, the repeated trauma was causing severe tissue damage that would eventually lead to infections, gangrene, and in some cases, the loss of fingers or toes. The venom injection beauty treatments that drove queens to madness. Egyptian queens believed that small amounts of snake venom, when injected directly under the skin, would grant them supernatural beauty and divine protection from their enemies. But the process of obtaining and administering this venom created a nightmare that haunted the royal courts for centuries. Sacred cobras were kept in golden cages within the temples, their venom extracted using hollow reeds inserted directly into their fangs. The extraction process was performed by specially trained priests who often died from accidental bites, their positions filled by a constant stream of replacements who knew they were likely signing their own death warrants. The venom was then mixed with powdered gold and various plant extracts to create what they called the elixir of serpent wisdom. The injection process itself was a form of ritualized torture. Using bronze needles that had been blessed in sacred fires, priests would pierce the queen's face, neck, and hands dozens of times, injecting tiny amounts of the venom mixture under her skin. The immediate reaction was always the same: violent swelling, burning pain, and often temporary paralysis of the facial muscles. Queens would spend days unable to speak or eat solid food, their faces so swollen that they were unrecognizable even to their closest servants. But the long-term effects were even more disturbing. The repeated exposure to neurotoxins caused permanent changes to the queen's nervous systems, making them increasingly paranoid, aggressive, and prone to violent outbursts. Court records describe queens who would fly into murderous rages over minor slights, ordering the execution of servants who looked at them wrong or spoke too loudly in their presence. The venom was literally rewiring their brains, transforming once rational rulers into unpredictable tyrants who saw enemies and conspiracies everywhere. These horrific rituals reveal the terrifying price of divine beauty in ancient Egypt. Queens endured bloodbaths, toxic hair treatments, and living mummification, believing suffering would grant them godlike power. Their pursuit of eternal perfection instead brought madness, poisoning, and agony. Perhaps the most disturbing truth is that these women chose this torture willingly, trading their humanity for what they thought was immortality, only to discover that some crowns are heavier than death itself.